Hi everyone, Julie here. I have not done a video like this in a while, but I wanted to come in very, very quickly and do a short video on how you can read in French or any other language that you're learning, really. But because of the little branding shift, I'm not going to focus on French resources and French like apps where you can learn French specifically, but most of these tips will still work for anyone who's learning any language. So, to read in a foreign language is quite difficult because I mean, depending on the language, right? But I feel for French specifically, because we have this like literature past tense, it's a little bit difficult. So you have two options. You can use Link, which is an app that I've reviewed a couple of years ago. I personally don't think is that relevant if you're learning a language that has the same script as your native language, as in we have the same alphabet between French and English. So I don't think it's so relevant for that type of language learning. It is beyond amazing if you're learning a language with a different script, absolutely. But for a language with the same script, eh. Another thing you can do is to download the Kindle app on your phone. Okay, disclaimer, I hate reading on my phone. I feel like it's not the same as a book, even though it's the same content, but it doesn't feel like I'm reading a book. It feels like I'm just staring at my phone. So I'm not a huge fan of it. But when you are reading on Kindle, I'll show you real quick. You can do a couple of really cool things, which will really help you if you're like intermediate, in French and you want to read. So this is what it looks like. You can, for example, we'll pick the word lendemain. You see, so you click on it and it gives you the dictionary definition. So for example, for those of you who are learning French, it would be the definition jour qui suivra ou qui a suivi celui dont on parle. Well, that's a terrible example because it's very confusing. It's basically the day after, le lendemain. So you have the dictionary definition. If, like in this case, it's even more confusing, you can then switch. Well, you have the Wikipedia page, but it's not relevant for most words. It's more for like places and stuff. And then you have the translation, which says next day. So I find that to be so amazing because I don't have to stop, put the book down, find the translator, dictionary, whatever, and look up the word. It's just boom, immediate. I think it also works on the Kindle reading tablet thing. Um, but I don't know because I read on my phone mainly because it's just more practical to have it rather than a Kindle plus a phone plus this. So I don't really use it. So yeah, but I think it works also on there. Something else you can do, which is absolutely awesome, is that you can create notes. So for example, the word heureusement, like this, heureusement, fortunately, you can then, hang on, let me see if I can do this. You can then do this and you can color code it. So let's say yellow, right? And then you can do like all the verbs in yellow, all the nouns in blue, all the adjectives in pink, and you can color code all of the vocabulary that you didn't know and you had to look up. And then you can access your notes for that book and you can have like basically flashcards. They're not exactly flashcards, you would have to turn them into flashcards, but they're the list of vocabulary are pretty much made like this, right? Like organized. You can organize them however you want, really. Like, doesn't have to be per grammar groups. You can do it per topics or whatever. It really is up to you. But I find that to be really, really cool. And then something else I was going to say is that reading in French is a little bit difficult because of that literary past tense. And also because, I don't know if you knew this, but French has way fewer words than English. And that's why I personally love reading like nonfiction in English because I feel the words that there are more words and they're just more accurate and more nuances between the words. But in French, because there are fewer words, especially in literature, writers have to be more creative and use more metaphors, and it's a little bit tricky to understand as a foreigner sometimes. And so, you know, read books that you've read before. Simple books. Even if you read a French translation of a book, doesn't matter. It will help you that you already know what's going on in the story. So, for example, Harry Potter is a good one. Harry Potter is harder than you probably think. Like, it's actually not that easy to read in French, but it's accessible, especially with, Kindle like this. Um, I know that, for example, the Hunger Games are written in the passé composé and imparfait. They don't use that weird other past tense, the passé simple. Don't use it. So if you've read it before, or if you know the movies, that's a good, option. I know that Paulo Coelho, for example, who is a Portuguese, well, Brazilian Portuguese writer, I find that his books in French, I find them like too simple, as in like it just feels a bit, yeah, like simple French. So I don't really enjoy them in French, but for someone who's learning French, it might be great. So yeah, find books that you've already read before, that you really like and you really know them, and read them in French. It's going to help you. Another thing that I have recommended before, but I really love, are Ollie Richard short stories in. So they actually have them in like a bunch of languages. The French ones, there is one for beginners and then there's one for intermediate, I think. I think the intermediate one is a little bit more interesting from what I heard from I haven't read it myself, but my students have told me it was a bit more interesting. The one for beginner, it's not a mind-blowingly interesting story, but the vocabulary that like, is so well written, the vocabulary that is used in those short stories is extremely relevant. Like it's stuff that you can reuse any day. And I also like the methodology that they introduced at the beginning, in terms of like how you should read. Like, should you stop and look up words? Should you read through it? Da, da, da. I think it's really well explained and I really like it. So I really, really recommend those. They're like $10, maybe 15 tops per book. So it's worth it. It's still $15, right? But it's worth it. So I really recommend those. What else can I recommend for reading? Yeah, it's pretty much it in terms of reading books. If you want to read online articles and blogs, I don't have any specific advice on that other than, if you're going to look up a recipe or like DIY ideas for my living room or whatever, you can you can look it up in French. What you can do is you can just put what you would look up in English, you put that through Google Translate or DeepL or whatever translator, and then you look that translation up instead. Oh, also, when you look stuff up, sorry, I feel like I'm just like vomiting all of the tips. When you look stuff up um, on Google, or I use Ecosia, which is another browser, you can change the settings of your research to make sure that you have French stuff or like stuff from France, from the country, right? So sometimes if you look up stuff, if you look up stuff in French, you will not get that many things because you'll get, especially if the words are very similar between French and English, you'll get English results. You need to change the settings in your research so that you get French stuff instead. And that should allow you to have access to more like blogs and articles and news and stuff like that in French. So yeah, I think that's all of the tip dump for today. Let me know if you have more tips that you've discovered and you want to share with other learners. And let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see you soon. Ciao.